For most people, a smile is probably the last thing that could scare someone. But for Elias, for the past 3 months, the only thing that scared him was his mother's smile. Elias had endured a difficult life. As the only son of a 5-member Muslim family, he had encountered death very early in his age. At just 10 years old, while illegally immigrating from their war-torn country, their boat had an accident and his 6-year-old sister, Ala, drowned in the sea. Her curly chestnut hair floating on the water, her blue and swollen face, and ultimately her eyes wide open with their color changed. That was the last image Elias had of Ala. A year later, he lost his father as well, and the responsibility of his mother and older sister Anis fell on his shoulders. But all of this wasn't as challenging as what Elias had to endure in the following years, taking care of a schizophrenic mother. Elias's mother couldn't bear to see her little daughter's funeral. For this reason, she never believed she died and kept waiting for her to come back. However, her mental breakdown began a year later when she took Elias and her older daughter, Anis, to school for a short camping trip and returned home to find her husband's hanging corpse. 2 days later, when Elias and his sister returned from the trip, the neighbors had broken into the house due to the stench. It was the first time Elias was afraid of his mother. She was sitting under her husband's hanging body, swinging his legs and laughing at how they dangled. The blurring line between illusion and reality was the most significant thing Elias knew about his mother's illness. Therefore, seeing his mother staring at a corner of the wall or murmuring to non-existent people had become completely normal for him. She had lost touch with the real world to the extent that she didn't even look at her children and spent all her time in her dimly lit bedroom. Elias, who lived alone with his mother after his sister's marriage, avoided entering her room except for meal times so as not to disturb her peace. It was enough for Elias to glimpse the mirror facing the bedroom from any corner of the house to see how his mother was. It had been like this for 10 years, until 3 months ago when Elias noticed a change in his mother, exactly one day after he left her alone with his sister in order to go to a friendly gathering. When he returned home while lying on his bed, she entered the room, smiled at him, and told him how happy she was that he was back. Her gaze, her smile, and she speaking with him after 10 years was like a miracle. Initially, he thought it might be an unknowing reaction, but in the following days, he noticed signs of improvement in his mother. She no longer showed interest in taking pills, she cooked, and it seemed like she had returned to normal life. Elias had no explanation for her change of behavior. Her medications had not changed. No significant events had happened. Nothing. But he was so happy at her apparent improvement that he paid little attention to her occasionally strange behavior. The fact that his mother sometimes sat next to his bed at night and sang lullabies from his childhood or the extra plate on the dining table didn't bother him at first. He knew an old mental disorder wouldn't improve overnight. Even the inexplicable wet spots scattered throughout the house, especially in his bedroom, and some of them stretching few paces on the floor, didn't alarm him. He only asked the apartment maintenance to check the water pipes. However, as time passed, he realized something was not right. Elias gradually discovered that the wet spots inside the house had no connection to pipe leaks. It wasn't his mother's doing either. Instead, they seemed more like something being dragged on the floor. Elias also found more important things. His mother's gazes and smiles weren't directed at him. She wasn't looking at him, but rather at a point above his head, smiling as if someone was sitting on his shoulders. Or on the nights when his mother sat beside his bed and sang lullabies, it wasn't for Elias, but for someone lying next to him. Finally, the dishes that were set on the dining table were arranged for a non-existing third person. He didn't need to ask anything. He knew who his mother was seeing. It was no one other than Allah. Elias was familiar with his mother's hallucinations, what she heard and saw, and was used to them. However, this time was different, and it disturbed Elias. Her new hallucinations had roots in reality, and all of them about Allah. Allah had cerebral palsy in her childhood. She couldn't walk and used to drag herself on the ground. Elias used to put her on his shoulders and twirl her around to make his sister happy. Most nights, she slept beside Elias, and she loved spaghetti. the same dish she had been preparing every day for the past few weeks. The reason for the wet spots on the floor remained unanswered. Elias couldn't ignore the things were happening. He was not superstitious, but as it was said in their holy book, the Quran, he believed in the existence of spirits and some supernatural beings. He knew they had no access to the human world. The only thing that gave him peace of mind was these religious beliefs, but what he witnessed that night questioned all of his beliefs. 2 hours had passed since midnight, and Elias was asleep when he woke up to a whispering in the dark. He realized someone was lying beneath his bed. He turned on the nightlight. It was his mother, who had tucked her head under the bed and was speaking softly to someone. "Come sleep in your spot, you'll wake him up." Elias asked his mother who she was talking to. "Allah is under the bed, she doesn't want to sleep." It was the first time in 10 years that his mother mentioned Allah's name. Elias knew he shouldn't argue with her. He took his mother to her room and asked her to go to sleep, but before that, to calm her down, he turned toward his room and asked Allah to come out from under the bed. After he tucked his mother to bed, he returned to his room and lied down, closing his eyes. Apparently, not only her condition hadn't improved, but she had lost touch with reality even more. However, a few minutes later, in the darkness of the room, something emerged from under the bed, and Elias himself couldn't distinguish between illusion and reality. First, there was a thud under his mattress that jolted him out of sleep. He assumed that his mother had returned, but no one was there. Sounds came from under his bed as if someone was dragging themselves on the floor. Elias bent down to get a better look at what was happening under his bed, and when he saw 2 child-sized hands coming out, he was fixated by the childlike figure crawling slowly on the floor, emerging from under the bed. He was drenched in sweat. He didn't know whether he was dreaming, but he was sure that Allah, as always, was walking with her hands and dragging her body with her. In the darkness of the room, Elias saw Allah stopped moving and turned her head. She stared at Elias and started moving towards him. Elias was hyperventilating. What was more disturbing was the sound reaching Elias's ears. Allah's clothes and the ground beneath her were completely wet, and the sound of her hands hitting the wet ground could be heard. Due to this dampness, her movements were slow and heavy. Allah reached the bed and lifted herself slightly. She extended her hand toward Elias, but at the last moment, in sheer terror, Elias turned on the nightlight, and in an instant the nightmare ended. He was alone, trembling. He couldn't sleep until morning. He was certain he hadn't been dreaming, but what he had seen was so unbelievable that he couldn't accept it. He tried talking to a few people about his problem and seek help, but every time he received the same answer, that he should see a therapist, as he might be becoming like his mother. Gradually, he too began to believe he had developed schizophrenia, especially as he had read that schizophrenia could be hereditary. Besides, 10 years of caring for an ill mother could make anyone delusional. Even his older sister, Anis, saw nothing abnormal in the house, leading Elias to prefer thinking of himself as sick rather than accepting that his dead sister had returned home. However, as the days passed, Allah's presence in the house became more apparent. 2 months had passed since the incidents began, and his mother's stares and smiles no longer pleased Elias. Instead, they terrified him. He now understood the meaning behind his mother's gaze on him, Allah sitting on his shoulder. He couldn't say whether it was hallucination or real, but he felt the weight of Allah's body on his shoulders. Neither prayers nor the pills, or anything for that matter, helped Elias. He slept with sleeping pills at night, and the thought of himself becoming insane was increasing day after day. Only one question lingered in his mind. Why did Allah have to come back? And after 10 years? He had heard the answer from his mother many times. Allah wants us all to be together. And now, her presence completely filled the house, and it seemed like she got what she wanted. However, when the anniversary of Allah's death arrived, Elias realized that he had completely misunderstood his mother's intention. The night before, Elias had managed to fall asleep with the help of a few pills. As the result, he remained oblivious to the strange noises coming from his mother's room since morning. It wasn't until he became aware of his mother's lifeless body hanging that he realized she had taken her own life several hours ago, veiled by the curtains of her room. Elias attempted to bring her down but failed. His mother's cold body and bluish face showed it was too late. He could only manage to contact the police and then sit alone, mourning for her. His crying came to an end when he heard the intermittent sounds of something heavy colliding with the wall of his mother's room. He was too tired to get up. The loud thud ceased. His gaze shifted to the antique mirror across his mother's room. His nightmares were not meant to end. He wasn't mistaken. His mother's lifeless body floated in the air, colliding with the room's wall. A few minutes ago, he had tried to bring her down, perhaps causing the body to jerk, but that wasn't the reason. The body moving as if someone was trying to swing it. He had witnessed a similar scene when his mother was swinging his father's corpse. He shifted to get a better view inside the room and saw something horrifying that froze the blood in his veins. For the first time, he saw Allah's face staring at him through the mirror, smiling while playing with her mother's corpse. Elias was shocked. Allah's face was exactly the same as the last time he had seen it, pale and bruised, with eyes that seemed to lack pupils. Unconsciously, he continued to stare at Allah. Something happened that made Allah stop playing with her mother's corpse. She threw herself from the edge of the bed and started moving towards Elias. This was no longer a hallucination, and it was really happening in bright daylight. She kept leaving water stains behind, and when she reached him, she climbed up his shoulders. Elias had completely lost his mind and began to scream in fear, closing his eyes to ease his terror. Elias was the first classmate of Sarah that Sam managed to find. A week had passed since Elias's mother's funeral, and he was being cared of by his sister under strong sedatives at home. Sam came to meet him. A few words from Anis and seeing Elias in that state were enough for Sam to understand that Elias was experiencing the same thing as Sarah. Despite Anis's opposition, Sam tried to talk to Elias and gather information about the house where the gathering took place. Elias was heavily influenced by his medications, but Sam's words stirred something in his mind. He remembered that the events had started exactly on the day after the party. Now he understood that Sarah had similar experiences. It wasn't a hallucination or illness. Everything that had happened was real. Anis couldn't allow Sam to push his brother any further in that state. So when she saw that Sam wasn't ending his conversation, she threatened to call the police. Sam, having no other choice, wanted to leave, but Elias grabbed his hand, preventing him. Sam asked Elias to take him to the house where the party took place, but Elias resisted. If that house was the cause of these events, re-entering it could make everything worse. They needed to understand who they were dealing with, and to discover that, they had one more option: finding the other people who were present at the party that night. If everything could be traced back to that house, then their other friends must have had similar experiences.